Hey, I'm Emma Garlett and welcome to this episode of Paint It Blak. This week I have a special guest here with me, Simon Hawkins, who's the CEO of YMAC. Welcome to Paint It Blak.
Yeah, thanks Emma, thanks for having me.
So tell me a bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, well I'm the CEO of YMAC and we're the native title representative body for the Merchants and Gascoyne in the Pilbara. And I've been in the role for about 20 years. Originally I'm a town planner, environmental scientist, and I got headhunted for this role all those years ago, and it's been a fantastic journey. 20
years is a long time.
Yeah.
You'd probably be one of the longest serving CEOs of a registered native title body in the state.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that, but there's a few others that have predated me, but most probably, certainly WA, but whether it's nationally, I don't know.
Yeah. In 20 years, I would imagine you would have done so much work over the years, and you would have seen Indigenous affairs change a lot over that time as well. So do you mind telling me a bit about your work?
Sure. When I first started, YMAC had been around for about 8 years, and it was a very preliminary sort of work that they were doing as an organisation. Native title was new, so people were trying to work out what they could prosecute, how they could prosecute claims in the court and what have you. And then in my early days in 2003, the mining boom was happening. So we had all the big miners like Rio Tinto, BHP and others, and FMG come forward and wanting to negotiate agreements. So there was about 7 or 8 years of activity that was just high volume, dealing with massive amounts of workloads with those companies and plus others in the iron ore sector, principally, both in the Merchants and Gascoyne and the Pilbara. So, and at the same token, we're still dealing with matters through the court to get recognised for recognition of native title, and also making challenges to how companies and others operate. And I suppose one thing I reflect upon is how the level of engagement between companies has become more consistent, and there's a lot more respect for Aboriginal people in that space. When I first started, there was the level of racism, the level of lack of understanding was a big issue.
You mentioned racism was a big issue when you first started.
People didn't respect Aboriginal people's connection to country or their place on country. I remember we wrote to BHP raising a whole range of issues, and they just basically ignored us. And I think it's only up to about 4 years ago where the first BHP CEO, Mackenzie, met with the Garriara people, where they've been there for 50 years. So, you know, those sort of relationships have taken a long time to come to some sort of meaningful place now.
And when you look at, the mining industry, what's really prominent right now? I understand that, like, clean energy, you released clean energy guidelines.
Sure, yeah, so we have, and with the native title process, you've got the right to negotiate, and you've got the Future Act regime, and that has its limitations because it kind of works with the mining legislation, works towards the favour of the miners. The beauty about the clean energy space is it's a greenfields industry, and it's an opportunity for traditional owners and First Nations people to actually have a proper relationship and a proper partnership going forward under the state government policy to get a licence for the companies to operate on country to test out what their renewable preferences are, wind, basically wind or solar or sort of hydrogen or whatever. They actually have to get an agreement with the traditional owners. So traditional owners are in a real strong place in which to negotiate and be a true partner in the process going forward. And as we can see, that the plans by the government is just absolutely enormous, what's been proposed for the renewables, and the impact to country, particularly for traditional owners in right across Western Australia, will have a significant impact. So they really need to be at the centre of those negotiations.
Are you seeing that in your work, that traditional owners are the centre of those negotiations?
To a certain extent, yes. I think there still is a lot of people that are trying to circumvent that, and that's kind of unwise, because we're trying to, through our guide, is educate people and show a way that partnership can actually true and in an effective way.
Especially if there's so much opportunity, like you're saying, it's a whole new industry, there's lots of projects being developed, there's so many different types of renewables that you could potentially use. Could you please tell me a bit about the areas in which you work and the significance to renewables?
Yeah, well, the Pilbara is in the top 4 locations in the world for solar intensity, and it's got very flat country, so it's ideal for solar panels on large scale, 10,000 hectare sort of size operations. And Yamatji's got world-class wind, so that's on a mixture of Yamatji, which is the Midwest, and that has a mixture of obviously freehold and sort of Crown Reserve for wind as well as solar. It's also got very good solar. We were involved in a project, in a pre-feasibility study in a renewable project in the Pilbara, which is a 10,000 hectare solar farm, which was going to produce about 7 gigawatts of power. That was going to be exported to the Indonesian market, and that predated the Sun Cable, which is in the Northern Territory. So it's just a basically demonstration project that shows how you can actually have renewables and export it. You run it through a DC cable and you can actually run across the ocean. And at the time, that was the longest DC cable in the world. There's now, right around the world, there's longer ones in the pipeline. So there's a great ability of countries that have incredible resources, in our case wind and solar, plus obviously the development of hydrogen and other ammonia and other sort of products, to export that overseas, whether it's through a submarine cable, which sounds like a really unusual thing that you can run power on under the water, but it does actually happen around the world, or through exporting through ships through ammonia or hydrogen when they get the technology right for those areas.
Do you have any projects that you're working on at the moment in the renewable space?
Well, we've produced a guide because we wanted to advocate for that on behalf of traditional owners, but also educate both sides, traditional owners, to understand the process from start to finish. We've also done that for industry, so we can improve their sort of relationships and the principles of engaging with traditional owners. YMAC is also a 50% owner in Pilbara Solar. That organisation is separate to YMAC, and they've got some projects online and doing work in that space, and their principles is very much aligned with YMAC, which is traditional ownership, equity ownership, which is critical, true partnerships, and obviously having the ability to generate capital out of these new industries, and there could be a generational capital transfer within their own communities, so we can address those issues of closing the gap through this opportunity.
A lot of work that you're doing. What do you do for fun, like outside of work?
Well, I used to surf a bit, but I haven't been able to do that after a shoulder injury, but I travel a lot with my wife. My kids are all sort of kind of independent now, so we're always going somewhere and they're always saying, where are we? But we're actually travelling and doing those sort of things.
Nice.
I enjoy environmental issues, so I like bushwalking. I like cooking. Cooking's a big part of my life, so I kind of keep pretty occupied doing those sort of things.
Yeah. And if you think about your tenure so far at YMAC and you look across the time, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of developing really long-term relationships with traditional owners. That to me has been, it's guided my life in a lot of things that I do. I'm proud of the fact that we've achieved a lot of results, and if you look at the closing the gaps outcomes, the work in the native title space is one of the highlights, that it actually is achieving closing the gaps. There's been a massive change, and we've been influential in that, and improving relationships between non-Indigenous and Indigenous groups, and we'll continue to do that. And on a personal level, I've always loved the fact that I've been able to evolve with the job as each new challenge and each new opportunity comes along, and being self-reflective so I can keep providing a good level of leadership and service to what we're doing.
Could you please explain what's in the clean energy guidelines?
Yeah. Well, we've developed all these principles about engagement. There's a whole level of principles of engagement about how to deal with negotiations, including things like that companies will need to actually ensure that the traditional owners have adequate advisors, whether it's economic advisors, environmental advisors on projects, how the company needs to go out and engage from the very start. We've also produced a timeline of a typical project from start to finish, so when you get to the point where you're actually moving towards a power takeoff agreement at the very end of the project from the very first stage of engagement. And critically, we've talked about free, prime, informed consent, FPIC, in the process, and we've demonstrated that a project can still achieve FPIC with all the different stages of the project along the way, which will keep the traditional owners or First Nations people involved in obviously decision making and authority to proceed. And we see that as being critical, and we've been able to demonstrate to companies that don't be afraid about FPIC. It's just a good thing to do to have a proper relationship. These projects are going to be on country for over 100 years and more, depending if technology changes. And we keep saying to people, Aboriginal people aren't going away. This is their country, and you need to have that long-term relationship.
It's quite powerful, really, when you think about it, because there's a few other clean energy sort of guidelines and principles out now, but they're not from registered native title body corporates. They're from like consulting firms and other groups of people. So how significant do you think it is that there's an Aboriginal corporation putting out the guidelines and telling people what they want to see in the industry? Yeah,
look, it's first-hand experience. This is the work we do, so we have expertise in the space, so it's first-hand experience we're putting into the guide. We're also, compared to the other guides that are around the place, we're the only one that's actually produced a timeline and can I say the traditional owners that we've presented it to in the regions love the fact because it gives incredible knowledge of what a project looks like, because a lot of the projects are 5 to 7 years before they actually get shovel ready. So there's a lot of stuff that happens along the way. So we're educating traditional owners about that process and demonstrating to them how they can be involved and how the company can do things in a better way that keeps everyone happy. Our proposals aren't about stifling development. It's about enhancing development and fast tracking development. So it's in the interest of everyone. I love the educational piece for traditional owners. I also like to educate a greenfields industry because a lot of renewable developers have no appreciation of Aboriginal culture, no real understanding of how to actually do it, and we've been able to demonstrate that. And we're also welcoming feedback if anyone thinks there's any gaps in it. In our project, we put it out there. We put it out as it's available online. People can see the guidelines and see what we're doing there. And if there's any feedback or any gaps, we're happy to take that on board.
One of the questions that I have, 10 years from now, how many projects do you think would maybe utilise the guidelines, or how many percentage of projects do you think we could see that have traditional owners have equity share arrangement in those?
We'd like to see all the projects have it. At the moment, it's a very low percentage. The Commonwealth are obviously putting out some their own guidelines that encourages. So if companies want to get access funding from ARENA and elsewhere, then they'll have to actually demonstrate their true partnership with the traditional owners. And we're saying true partnership is through having these principles being applied, but also principles of FPIC. So you'll see a lot more of it. And I think what it will do will demonstrate that companies will get their approvals more quickly because they've got a relationship with the groups. If they walk away from it, it's going to be very difficult for those companies to achieve what their objectives are.
Do you think that there will be people out there that won't engage traditional owners in their projects?
Yeah, we've already seen that, and they're going to walk away. And what they're obviously hoping is that they can influence government, state as well as Commonwealth, so they can actually get their work prioritised through other areas. But the government's policy at the moment is that you actually have to seek the endorsement from the traditional owner group, and that's why this guide is really important, because we're demonstrating to the groups how they go about giving their endorsement without compromising on their rights and their interests.
So for anyone wanting to get involved in some of this work, how could they do so?
Yeah, well, they could basically contact us through our website, make contact to us and we'll respond. We're happy for everyone to review our guide and have a look at it and see if it suits what they're planning. Pilbara Solar, which is obviously a separate organisation to us, have a separate website, and they're also an opportunity to have a look at their website and making contact at Pilbara Solar.
Thank you so much for having a discussion with me on Paint It Blak. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks for having me.
So thank you everyone for watching this week's episode of Paint It Blak. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.